Hi guys, Mr. David here. So a few weeks ago, I recorded an interview with Stina Isaksen for my interview series where I talked to my friends with interesting jobs. She's a swing dance instructor out of New York City and a wonderful dancer. Well, this interview was done before the events of George Floyd and the current protests that are happening all over our country. Now, the library has always been a place of acceptance, inclusion, and learning. And so Stina and I were talking, and we realized that we forgot to include some very important things in our conversation, that we have some gaps that we have to fill in. So we went back, found time, and did a second interview. It's not as long as the first one, but hopefully this fills in where we're coming from and how we feel about what's going on right now. So I hope you guys enjoy this extra interview. Thank you. Okay. Stina, thank you so much for coming back and talking with us again. I know there were some things that we didn't get to talk about that with the way the world is right now, kind of current events, we just wanted to touch on a little bit. So, after our first conversation, we were talking about the contributions of the African-American community to swing dance and the arts in general. Are there any dances that you perform that have their roots largely in that community?
So first off, I want to say thank you for having me again.
Oh, no problem.
Because I feel like this is a really great opportunity to talk about something that I fully skipped over and is really important. So when you say contribute, I really think that the African-American community created the dance and developed the dance, and it's other communities that have contributed to the dance. So I know that people have said it before. It feels like I'm a guest in someone else's house. So I feel really lucky to be able to dance it. I feel really lucky to be able to research it and teach it. But to answer the rest of the question, there's Lindy Hop, there's Charleston, and then within the Lindy Hop, I also do shag and Balboa. So those are really fun, really hoppy and uppity dances.
Now, shag, what kind of is shag like?
It was created in the Carolinas.
Okay.
And I believe it started as collegiate shagging. This is the thing. I am going to get some things wrong. I am not a scholar in this. I am human, and I am learning. That's the important thing, is I'm actively learning and basically cramming all this information as fast as I can. But it also was created by by the African-American community. And the way I best know to do the shag is basically your jump, hop, run, run, jump, hop, run, run. So it's, and it's usually done at very fast tempos. So,
well, like a lot of the swing dances, it's all about the tempo.
Yes. So these ones are usually done at the really, really fast tempos, and you just see people spinning really, really fast, and is joyous.
Well, that's good. That's good. Now, we mentioned the Charleston. Charleston is one of the most famous. I mean, even if you don't know the Charleston, you know dances that have been created out of the Charleston, like in Kid and Play. Kid and Play is basically doing an augmented Charleston with a partner. Now, that went into the Lindy Hop. Isn't part of the Lindy Hop doing the Charleston?
That's a great question. People that do Lindy Hop usually learn how to do Charleston. Sometimes they do it once they feel more comfortable with Lindy Hop and with 6-count swing, because you can mix the moves together and they kind of intermingle. So it's really fun to combine all these things together. Same thing with, there's Bal swing. So you can do Balboa and swing together. It's like a big, just add more stuff, add anything you can get.
Now, what other dances kind of meld with the Lindy Hop or led to the Lindy Hop?
Lend with, I don't know how to answer this question.
Oh, sorry.
Ooh. No, it's okay.
Well, the Charleston kind of, you said, blended with it and influenced it a little bit. So I was just saying if there were any other dances you knew of that kind of came out of this community that really go hand in hand or became a part of it?
Okay, I understand the question. I think that Lindy Hop has continued on and become something different. I mean, obviously we have Lindy Hop that still retained itself, but then of course people took it and it became more of a rock and roll and boogie woogie, which I do not do. And I have nothing against it. It's just not my style.
It's not in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's not in my wheelhouse. It's not something that I've spent much time on. I do watch clips of it. It's very cool to watch, especially competition videos of boogie woogie. But it's more upright, and the music is like the big difference.
Sure.
Because for me, I really like swing and I like jazz, and rock and roll and boogie woogie are obviously going to be done to rock and roll music.
So going back to the community that these came out of, the African-American community, do you know any performers of the Depression era, the 20s through the 40s, that really were synonymous with this style?
So most of them, unfortunately, have passed on at this point. In fact, most recently, one of the most famous ones to pass away was Norma Miller. And she was a part of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. And she was actually the youngest person to join the troupe. She was only 14 years old when she joined, which was crazy. And she was really known for just being thrown in the air. And she really had like just the coolest attitude. She did not care. She was going to do what she wanted to do. So she was very sassy. And I got to meet her a handful of times. But I kind of kept my distance just because, you know, when you go to these events where there are lots of swing dancers, everybody wants to meet the greats. And I was still developing who I was as a dancer. And I didn't feel comfortable enough to go and talk to her. And now she's gone. So learned your lesson.
Now, you mentioned Whitey's Lindy.
Lindy
Are
Hoppers.
they the group that are in the Hellzapoppin?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to bring up that clip and we can take a look and talk about that as we do that.
And would you like me to point out which one Norma is?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Cool.
All right. So here is Hellzapoppin, which was a famous series of shows, actually, in the Depression era Broadway that it looks like they made a movie of.
Yeah, it was one of the longest running Broadway shows at the time when it came on. So everybody loved this dance number, but of course it was not done to the song that you're hearing here.
And the colors look a little weird because they went through and tried to recolorize.
Yeah, I sent you this clip. I sent you this clip because I think that seeing it colorized really brings more life to the performers. So right here, one thing I will point out about this clip, it is one of the most iconic Lindy Hopper clips of all time. I refer to it as the Bible, basically. But you'll notice all of these people that are showing up. You've got people dressed like servicemen. You've got this guy right here.
The kind of a chef, baker.
Dressed like a chef. Yeah. And then you'll see coming up, we already passed, there were some drivers.
Well, we saw a maid as well. Yeah.
2 maids. Yeah. And this is not by accident. This is because Hollywood was showing white audiences how we see Black people.
Right.
So they only really had jobs in the service industry. So they were basically showing one narrative of what Black people could be in the 1940s. This was 1941.
Well, basically saying that they're the ones who work for you and entertain you. Like, it's all about them being service, not just in industry, but also in entertainment. Yes,
because also if you are, as we're watching this clip, these people basically, they just show up for this one scene and then you don't see them again in the movie. So they're here just to entertain you and give you that flashy dance scene, and then they're gone.
And as you can see, they're fantastic musicians and performers. So.
Yeah, Slim and Slam are some of the musicians here. So they fantastic musicians. Really great stuff. And a little bit of hamming it up. I can talk about that later. But this right here, this is, and I wrote it down. That's William Downes and Frances Mickey Jones right there. And
I would have broken a knee already.
It's one of my favorite things that she does.
No, even the stuff he does.
Yeah, no, I love him too. She throws her hat off and she's like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I'm wearing this. This right here is Norma Miller.
Okay.
Yeah, Norma Miller and Billy Ricker. I remember Norma saying that move right there was like an arm destroyer.
Oh, it looks like it, because he's basically not really even holding onto her arms. He kind of had one hand on the back of her neck, and she's flopping around while holding onto him. That couldn't have been comfortable.
And there's Al Minns and Willa Mae Ricker. They're so good.
Just how effortlessly they make it look, and this is so difficult.
That right there is called a pancake, by the way.
Okay.
Where she flipped upside down. And then this move coming up is called Shaking the Change.
Well, and you see a lot of, in partner dance, you see a lot of the girl getting flipped around and picked up. But in that last one, we had the girl picking the guy up. Yeah. And you don't see that a whole lot. Or at least I don't.
This right here is Ann Johnson and the famous Frankie Manning. This is the man who he really helped bring swing back in the 80s.
Okay.
And this choreography is his.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So he basically was Whitey's right-hand man. And what I love about that shot that we just saw is it really highlighted just how fast their feet were going.
Oh, sure.
That's an over the head. And then everybody dies.
Of course, because that's such a high energy number.
Yeah. It's absolutely fantastic. And of course, you can see their names right here.
Yeah. That looks like it has it down at the bottom. So
yeah,
next to her.
So it definitely, I've seen this clip so many times, and I always love watching the dancing. It's electric, it's joyous, it's culture.
Yeah.
But as you dig deeper into it, and you realize that they had to wear these uniforms that don't really add to the plot, and what they usually wear when they perform is completely different from that. It just kind of makes me sad that, that was made to be the highlight. Is oh yeah, but they are not your equal.
So we mentioned them being in the service industry uniform, but also if you look at that scene, there they had the white actors looking from beyond a curtain way over at the side, but never in the same frame, because most likely, unfortunately, for that time, they probably weren't in the same building. They weren't even scheduled on the same day, because why would they? Type attitude.
You are correct.
Which is really sad. It's really sad.
You are correct. There were laws in act. In fact, in that movie, there's only one scene in the entire movie where a black person and a white person are even in the same room, and it's for a one-line crossover, basically. Right. So they also, a lot of the times with movies like this, when they would send them to the South, when they would send them around for distribution, because of laws where people didn't want to see black people on screen, they sometimes would edit the scenes completely out, or they sometimes would edit down the talking scenes. So it definitely was not fair what was happening.
Right. All right. So we've got the Nicholas brothers. Now, the not the one thing, the two things I know about this clip, because I've seen it multiple times, they actually did this in one take. This was the
That's correct.
first take,
I
because
know.
they're just amazing. And the band leader and singer is one of the most famous African-American band leaders, and I've been a huge fan of his for years, Calloway.
He's one of my favorites too.
I mean, I love the original Blues Brothers movie, but the scene that every time it comes on, I have to watch it no matter what, is Cab Calloway singing Minnie the Moocher. It moves away from the rest of the plot, and they're just like, we have Cab Calloway, of course we're going to have him perform, because he is one of the most iconic movers and singers, if you ask me, ever. Even back in old cartoons, there was actually a famous cartoon where they had him perform a song and then they animated over his frame because they liked the way he moved and sang the song. So they had the skeleton singing this Halloween song, but it was basically Cab Calloway's movement and performance.
That is awesome.
Okay. I talk way too much, so let's get the clip going.
I already love it.
I'm just also amazed that the tables don't shake at all when the two full-grown men are just jumping on it.
Well, they just bolted it down, you know? Yeah. They actually had no professional training at dancing, which is pretty amazing. They grew up with vaudeville shows, basically. So they would go watch vaudeville, and they would mimic the movements. So, I mean, you don't have to go to dance school to become a dancer. This is proof right here. You just got to feel it. And that's really what I feel when I am dancing Lindy Hop, is that, like, it's a feeling. It's not just about technique. And that's what a lot of people have argued, that, like, people that are teaching it aren't really teaching it in a way that would make a lot of people happy. They're just teaching the steps and the technique, but not the feeling.
Well, it's kind of like with talking about tap, because I know you're a tapper as well. The difference between rhythm tap and kind of the standard tap. Standard is all about the form and this, and the rhythm tapping is all about just making the sounds, creating the music. There is some form to it, but still. And one thing that's really, really important about this clip, because this came out in 1942, so just a year after Hellzapoppin, but I've talked to a couple of friends, you know, that know more about this than I do, because I am not African American. Sure.
But I definitely, you know, I'm trying to be a good ally. They said that it was so important to see an African American on stage dressed well.
Oh yeah,
because
the tuxedo.
They're wearing these amazing tails, and then Cab Calloway, of course, is wearing his amazing suit. So it meant something. It really inspired people, and it's just incredible to see. Important because, like we said, just a year before, they were putting them in service uniforms.
Right.
And I mean, of course, this doesn't mean that, like, 1942 was the year that they stopped doing that.
There's still issues that they're fighting in Hollywood today and in Broadway today, dealing with discrimination and also how we view characters that are, you know, I'm trying to think of a better word, but people of color and different ethnicities. That's a better word.
And didn't that staircase scene just make your groin hurt?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love that slide down. It's so good.
Now, you know, we talked a little bit about how the performers were dressed in that first clip, and the second clip, the service industry versus the tuxedos and how important that was. So in this era, there was a lot of discrimination that happened. That some of it has gotten better, but as we mentioned, there is still some discrimination in the performing arts these days. Now, in our last talk, we did talk about that you do have Asian heritage. Have you come across any discrimination in the performing arts yourself?
I feel like if I did experience it, it was very minor in comparison to other people.
Sure.
I would often go to calls where there's no rule about what the role race is. So, Lori in Oklahoma, where she could be anything. And in fact, the most recent production on Broadway, she was African American, which was really cool. But I would go to these calls, and basically the minute I walked in the room, I just had a feeling that they were like, we're not that progressive.
Right.
You can be like in the chorus, and that way we appear to look more
diverse,
PC, more diverse. And that's exactly what happens. Most of my credits have been either something that is an Asian character or I'm in the chorus. I've never, there was one time where I got to play someone who is most of the time played by a Caucasian. And I think that the Caucasians that were in the chorus were pretty mad that I got that role. And I was confused too, to be honest, but I was happy to get a shot to try something different.
Sure.
For once. Because, it's not that fun to be playing the same role over and over again, the same types of roles. And I also had, I don't want to say discrimination, but sometimes I would go to Asian calls because I would think, well, obviously I'm not a white person, so I should go to the Asian calls. And then they wouldn't say it to me, but I could tell. They were like, she's not Asian enough. So I don't fit anywhere.
Sure. Now, you've mentioned before that you do have a daughter, and I've seen your clips of you teaching her dance and her coming in just wanting to be a part of it. She is absolutely adorable. Have you thought about how, when the time comes, how you're going to talk about discrimination with her?
I mean, we are already starting to talk to her. We're not saying like people do hate crimes to one another, but we are, talking about how people are different. There are a lot of resources that you can use. Number one, a library. So I'm sure that you have books on the subject.
And we try to be as completely inclusive as possible.
Yeah. And, I live in New York City. It's very blue here. We have a lot of resources at bookstores and stuff. And I actually called a bookstore today and they were sold out of the books on racism and diversity, which is a great problem to have, that people are actively going out and buying these books. I also think things like Sesame Street are great because even if they don't mention it, all the characters, all the human characters are different ethnicities. They all live together. They all treat each other with respect. All the monsters are different colors and they treat each other with respect. And, there's different species. There's like baby bear, there's big bird. Everybody treats each other fairly and the same.
Right. There's actually, they did last weekend. So who knows when we get this aired, but for us, it was last weekend. CNN, in conjunction with Sesame Street, did a town hall on discrimination and racism, which is wonderful. I do suggest everyone go and watch that because it's people asking and a lot of kids asking questions, and not just the CNN reporters and politicians who are taking part, but they have the Sesame Street characters helping explain issues. And I thought that was absolutely a wonderful way to address this topic for parents and for kids.
It was great. We watched about half of it, because they kind of swapped out the characters at some point, and it was all news reporters at some point. And my kid was kind of like, what is this? Where's Elmo? Yeah. But, it did bring up a lot of things that we could talk about. Kids at 2 years old can already understand that, someone's feeling sad or
Yeah.
someone's upset. And that's exactly how Elmo felt. He was really confused. He was worried, and his dad was very nurturing to him and explaining things really well.
Right.
I also recommend it. And I think if people are really uncomfortable about talking about racism, you don't have to be uncomfortable about it. The more you talk about it, the easier it gets.
Oh, absolutely. Going back to speaking on performing arts and Broadway, because that's both of our initial trainings, it's the line from South Pacific when talking about racism, it has to be carefully, carefully taught.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I actually played that on the piano today, and I was filming myself, and I was like, this is not my key. I can't post this.
But I mean,
very true.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. That show, while having other issues, was very ahead of its time when talking about racism and discrimination, while still having some scenes that were not today would never fly. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Well, and I feel like now when you put up a show like South Pacific, people kind of look at you and look at the theater company, and they're like, why are we doing this show? We should be doing something different.
Right.
Which I love the classics. I always will have a soft spot for them. There recently was an issue with Carousel that came out, and so it's got to change.
So yeah, well, I mean, little by little, every brick in the wall, just got to pick it up and take it down. It's not going to be a entire thing coming down all at once. We would it to, but the issue is changing people, and that is more difficult, and that's done through communication, conversations, and just trying to understand where everybody is coming from. Like I said, discrimination has to be carefully taught, but in the same way, it has to be carefully untaught. So you can't just go in, you're wrong, because there is a psychological effect where if someone starts being told, even if you're giving facts, but starts being told that their beliefs are wrong, they dig in to that belief stronger, even when given evidence that they're wrong. They're so threatened that they hold on to it tighter. And so we have to be very careful with how we deal with these things.
Of course. And I've met a lot of, I know a lot of people where it's hard when somebody like comes at you, and even if they're giving you information that is correct, if it differs from yours and makes you feel like bad, or that you were the bad person in the situation, it is very easy to just shut off and be like, I'm not going to listen to you. And that's the hardest thing, I think. The hardest part about starting this journey of trying to be more like a better ally, and to really, really listen to what people are saying, especially with what's going on right now in the country. So I try really hard not to throw words around and accuse people of being things. That there are certain words that make people really shut off.
Right.
One being, and we can talk about it right now, is just by saying that someone's a racist. If you call someone a racist, a lot of the times that person will just shut off and be like, no, I'm not, I'm done. So there are other ways to chat about it. So definitely like do your research and be open to talking with friends. Try not to take offense. Everybody is hurting. Everybody is. We're trying to find a way to meet together and view each other as equal.
Sure. So bringing this back to dance, swing, Lindy, Charleston, all of the dances that you do, bringing it back to that, what do you do or plan on doing to be a better ally when it comes to these dances? Like, are you,
oh my goodness,
or do you already, when performing it, say, hey, this was developed by this group or that? Do you make it an educational moment, or?
So I will be honest, Mr. David. I thought for a long time that I was already being a good ally.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was doing very little. And my friends need more support, and they need more help, and they need their voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that like I'm not letting them speak. It just means that like they don't feel like they are welcome in the scene anymore. So one of the easiest things that I can do, and anybody can do, is when you go to a social dance, so that's where you go out dancing and you just ask someone to dance, is a lot of the times African Americans show up to a dance and it's their first time there. They've never done it before. And they're standing on the side and they're like, why is no one asking me to dance? Why has no one asked me? And it's their dance. It's their dance. So we should make them feel welcome so that they want to stay.
Sure.
Another thing that I can do, because again, like I was not doing my part, I can do more research. I actually really, really enjoy history.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I was cramming and stressing about this interview, knowing that I was going to get some things wrong and not be perfect, because I am human and I'm trying to learn. But I knew that I can do my part to spread the history.
Right.
Like when my students come into the classroom or when they come into the studio for the first time, I mentioned the bare minimum from where the dance came from, who made the dance, and then we don't talk about it again.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it doesn't have to be that way. It's really like a privilege that I get to teach the dance. And so like, I'm just so thankful that I get to dance it, that I get to teach it, that I get to represent other people. And so because I'm representing somebody who isn't speaking or isn't being able to be heard, I need to be helping them. I need to be helping them be heard. I need to be sharing their message. And sorry, one last thing that I can do, because one last thing that's really easy for me to do is at my dance studio, about 4 times a month, we have 4 times a year, we do these big parties. We call them bashes. And we bring in a band and we do dance performances, and there's, live music and people dancing all night long. And I can make sure that we hire African American musicians.
Yeah.
So that they feel comfortable and they want to come, because there's no reason why we can't have them performing. I would love to have them. And it's just not something I had thought much about, which, yes, I know some people will probably be, head desking and being like, well, you must not have been awake. And for that, I apologize, like I just had my head in the sand and just chose or thought that this didn't affect me, but it does. It affects everybody.
Yeah. Going back kind of with what you were saying, you were talking about when your students come in to pass along more of the history. I mean, with dance, it is it does get passed on through generations, and we do try to preserve these older styles of dance. Ballet has been around for forever and then morphed into jazz, and we kind of know the histories of these, but these dances like swing, keeping those originators and those the famous artists from the 1940s, keeping their memories alive, helps with your further generations knowing these people contributed to history and do matter in this history. So I just wanted to touch on that and say how much I agree. So
that's great. Yeah. I mean, I feel like no matter what I say, that there's going to be someone out there that's probably thinking like, she's not doing enough. And like, I promise you, I'm not going to stop studying this after this interview. I find
the hardest thing is trying to ask, what more should I do? What more should I be doing? It is a difficult thing to ask and find. We want to do more, but it can be difficult at times to find out what to do. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming back for a second talk. I think this was important to go over a lot of what we went over, and hopefully people at home agree with us. So,
yeah, I hope so. I mean, if people feel uncomfortable about this subject, like, don't worry, me and Mr. David do too, you know, like we're all sweating. But I do think that this is a nice little zero entry pool to walk into talking about this subject.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you once again for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank Stina for coming in once again and talking with us. We had a wonderful conversation, and I think we touched on some very important topics. Once again, I want to stress that the library is a place of acceptance, learning, and inclusion. I hope that someday we can all learn to accept each other for our differences and that everybody feels included. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.